Homeless little boy is sleeping near a dumpster. A Hell's Angel found him and adopted him. The storm hit hard and fast. 1 minute the sky was a dull, gray nothing. The next, it dropped everything it had on the town. Snow came sideways. Wind screamed down the empty streets like something angry. The temperature had been falling all day, and now, past midnight, it had reached the kind of cold that bit right through whatever you were wearing and grabbed hold of your bones. Jack Grizzly Malone didn't mind the cold. He never had. He rode his motorcycle through the storm like he owned it. His big hands gripped the handlebars steady and sure. His leather cut, the one with the Hell's Angels patch worn soft from years of road miles, pressed flat against his broad chest in the wind. He wore no extra layers. Just the cut, his boots, and the kind of stubbornness that kept a man warm when nothing else would. He was 45 years old and looked every bit of it. His beard was thick and dark, shot through with gray at the edges. His face was hard. Not mean, exactly, but carved up by years of decisions that weren't always easy and roads that weren't always kind. His eyes, dark brown and deep-set, watched everything. Always had. That was just Jack. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. He'd left the clubhouse late, later than usual. The boys had been loud tonight, drinking and arguing about nothing that mattered. Jack had sat in the corner for a while, nursing one beer, not saying much. That was normal for him. He wasn't much for noise anymore. At some point, the noise had started to feel like pressure, and he'd pulled on his cut, grabbed his keys, and walked out without a word. Nobody stopped him. Nobody asked where he was going. They knew better. The road he took out of the clubhouse was the long way around the back edge of town. It wasn't the fastest way home, but Jack liked this stretch. During the day it was ugly, all cracked pavement and chain-link fences and old industrial buildings with their windows boarded up. But at night, especially in a storm, it was just quiet. And quiet was the one thing Jack truly valued anymore. He rode slow, not because of the ice, though the ice was real and it was bad. He rode slow because he wasn't in a hurry to get anywhere. He hadn't been in a hurry to get anywhere in a long time. The street lamps on this side of town were mostly dead. A few flickered, one buzzed and threw a weak yellow puddle of light across the road and then gave up entirely as he passed under it. The snow was thick on the ground already, maybe 4 inches, and still coming. His tire tracks filled in almost as fast as he made them. He passed the old diner on the corner, closed for years now. The sign above the door still had 3 letters hanging from it, crooked and forgotten. He'd eaten there once, a long time ago, with his brother Tommy. He didn't let himself think about that for more than a second. He almost didn't see it. He was about to give the throttle a little more and push on through when something caught his eye. Something near the dumpster in the alley beside the diner. Something small. Something that didn't belong in the rhythm of a snowstorm. Jack slowed, stopped. He sat there on the idling bike, squinting through the blowing snow. The dumpster was big and rusted, pushed up against the brick wall of the building. And there, pressed against the base of it, half buried under a thin dusting of snow, was a shape. A small shape. Too small. Jack cut the engine. The silence that followed was immediate and total, broken only by the wind. He climbed off the bike and walked toward the alley. His boots crunched on the snow. His heart, without his permission, had already started beating faster. He crouched down. It was a boy. A little boy. 5 years old, maybe. No older than that. He was curled tight into himself, knees pulled up to his chest, arms wrapped around his own small body, like he was trying to hold himself together. His lips were pale, nearly white. His breathing was so shallow that Jack had to lean in close, just to be sure there was any breathing at all. There was. Barely. Jack didn't think. He didn't weigh it out, or talk himself through it. He simply pulled off his leather cut and wrapped it around the boy in one swift, certain motion. Then he gathered him up off the frozen ground, careful and quiet, and held him close against his chest. "I got you," Jack said. His voice was rough and low. "I got you, kid." Jack didn't wait another second. He carried the boy back to the bike, holding him tight against his chest with one arm. The child weighed almost nothing. That fact hit Jack somewhere deep and painful, somewhere he didn't have a name for. A boy this age should feel solid, heavy with life and growing and all the things little kids are full of. This one felt like a bundle of dry sticks wrapped in wet cloth. Getting on the motorcycle with one arm holding a child was not easy. Jack managed it through sheer will. He swung his leg over, settled the boy across his lap, and pressed him close with his left arm. With his right hand, he started the engine. The bike roared to life, loud and sudden in the silent alley, and Jack pulled out onto the snow-covered street. He rode differently now. No more slow, drifting through the quiet. He leaned into the road with focus and intention, reading every patch of ice before he hit it, steering around the worst of it with small, controlled adjustments. The wind was brutal. It pushed against him from the side and tried to make the bike wobble, but Jack held firm. He always held firm. The boy did not move, did not make a sound. That scared Jack more than anything else about the night. He pulled the leather cut tighter around the small body with his arm. It wasn't much. The cut was thick leather, and it held some warmth, but the cold had already gotten deep into this child. Jack could feel it. The boy's skin, where it pressed against Jack's forearm, was like touching something pulled from a freezer. "Stay with me," Jack said through clenched teeth. The wind swallowed his words the moment they left his mouth. He said it again anyway. "Stay with me." He took the back roads. Not because they were better in the snow. They weren't. But they were faster to the clubhouse from this side of town, and fast was the only thing that mattered right now. He ran one red light, then another. The streets were empty. Nobody out on a night like this except a fool on a motorcycle and a boy who had run out of luck. The clubhouse appeared through the snow, like something solid in a world that had gone soft and white. It was a squat, wide building on the edge of a lot surrounded by a chain-link fence. Lights burned behind the frosted windows. A few bikes were still parked out front, dusted with snow. The noise from inside was faint but present, leaking out under the heavy front door. Jack hit the parking lot fast and killed the engine before the bike had fully stopped rolling. He was off it in one motion, the boy back in both arms now, and he crossed the lot in long, hard strides. He hit the front door with his boot. It swung open hard and banged against the interior wall. The room went quiet fast. Maybe 6 or 7 men were still up, scattered around the main room on battered couches and stools pulled up to a long wooden bar. Glasses stopped halfway to mouths. Cards were set down. Heads turned. Jack stood in the doorway with snow on his shoulders and a half-frozen child pressed against his chest. "I need blankets," he said. His voice came out like gravel. "Warm water. Now." For one long second, nobody moved. They just stared. Big men in leather and tattoos. Faces that had seen plenty of rough things in plenty of rough years. And every single one of them looked like they had no idea what they were seeing. Then they moved, all at once. Someone grabbed blankets from the back room. Someone else turned up the heat. 2 men cleared off a wide couch near the old iron radiator in the corner, tossing jackets and empty bottles to the floor without a thought. They gathered close, this circle of hard and weathered men, drawing in tight around the tiny pale boy that Jack Malone had carried in out of the storm. The blankets came first. Jack took them without a word and wrapped the boy layer by layer, tucking the edges underneath him like he had done this before. He hadn't, but his hands seemed to know what to do anyway. He pressed the back of his fingers to the boy's cheek, still cold, but the shallow rise and fall of the small chest was there, slow and unsteady, but there. "He alive?" asked a man named Deke from somewhere behind Jack's shoulder. Deke was a big man, broad as a door, with a gray beard that reached his collarbone. His voice was low and careful, the way you speak in a church or near something fragile. "Yeah," Jack said. "He's alive." The room let out a breath it had been holding. Then, the question started. "Where'd you find him?" someone asked. "Alley behind the Starlight Diner," Jack said, not looking up. "By the dumpsters." "By himself?" "By himself." A pause. Then another voice, sharper this time. That was Rennie. Young, always wound tight, always looking for the angle. He stood with his arms crossed near the bar, his jaw set hard. "We gotta call it in, Jack." Jack didn't answer. "I'm serious," Rennie said, pushing off the bar and taking a step forward. "We can't have a kid here. You know what happens if the wrong people hear about this? Cops show up, start looking around, asking questions. We don't need that kind of attention." "Nobody's calling anything tonight," Jack said flatly. "Jack." Rennie's voice climbed a little. "Think about what you're saying. This ain't our problem. We find a lost kid. We call it in. We're done. Simple. He would have been dead by morning." Jack finally looked up. His eyes found Rennie's and stayed there. "You understand what I'm telling you? Another hour in that cold, and this boy doesn't wake up. So no, we're not calling it in tonight." Rennie opened his mouth, closed it again. Another man, older, named Scratch, sat forward on his stool. He had a quiet way about him that most men in the room respected. When he spoke, people usually listened. "Rennie's not entirely wrong," Scratch said, his voice even and measured. "We got to think smart here. Kid shows up here, somebody's gonna come looking. Could be family, could be the law. Either way, it leads here. To us. Then we deal with that when it comes," Jack said. "And what do we tell them?" Rennie asked. "That we found him, and thought, you know what, let's just keep him. Jack, come on." "I'm not keeping him." Jack turned back to the boy. "I'm making sure he doesn't die tonight. There's a difference." The room got quiet again for a moment. The radiator knocked and hissed in the corner. Outside, the wind pushed against the walls of the building and moaned through the gaps around the windows. Deke rubbed the back of his neck. "What's the plan then? Morning comes, then what?" Jack didn't answer that either. Not because he didn't hear the question, but because he didn't have an answer yet, and he wasn't the kind of man to speak before he was sure. Rennie shook his head slowly. "This is gonna bring trouble. I'm telling you right now, this is gonna bring trouble straight to our door." Nobody argued with that. The truth of it sat in the room like smoke. But nobody made a move toward the phone either. One by one, the men drifted back to what they had been doing. The cards came back out. Glasses were refilled. The night settled back into something quieter, though the tension didn't fully leave. It just moved to the edges of the room and waited there. Jack pulled an old wooden chair close to the couch and sat down in it. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and watched the boy breathe. In and out. Small and slow and steady now, warming up by degrees under the pile of blankets. He wasn't going anywhere, not tonight. Jack dragged the couch closer to the old iron heater in the corner. It groaned against the concrete floor as he pushed it inch by inch, not caring about the noise. The heater ticked and radiated a dry, heavy warmth that smelled faintly of dust and burnt metal. It wasn't pretty, but it was heat. He lowered himself onto one knee beside the couch and studied the boy's face in the dim light. Up close, the kid looked even smaller. His cheeks were raw and red from the cold, and there were thin patches of frost still caught in his dark hair, just above his ears. His lips had moved away from that terrible pale blue color, which Jack took as a good sign. They were closer to pink now. Faint, but there. Jack reached out and hovered his hand over the boy's forehead for a second, uncertain. Then he pressed it down gently. Still cold under the surface. Not dangerously cold anymore, but cold enough to worry about. He stood up and moved to the small bathroom off the main hall. He ran warm water over a rag until it was damp and wrung it out. Walked back, sat on the edge of the couch beside the boy, and carefully pressed the warm cloth to the boy's cheeks. First one side, then the other, then across his forehead. He worked slowly, like he was afraid of breaking something. The frost in the boy's hair melted away under the warmth of the rag. Dark strands flattened against his head, damp now instead of stiff. Jack smoothed them back with the flat of his hand without really thinking about it. A few feet away, Deke watched from his stool without saying a word. He just held his coffee mug in both hands and watched. There was something in the old man's eyes that Jack didn't look at too closely. It felt too much like something soft. Jack folded the rag and set it aside. The boy's hands were still curled up near his chest, tucked under the edge of the blanket. Jack reached in carefully and lifted one of them out. It was a tiny thing. The fingers were stiff, and the skin was ice to the touch. Jack held the small hand between both of his and rubbed it gently, back and forth, trying to push warmth into it the way you'd try to start a fire with two cold sticks. His hands were rough, big, and cracked and scarred across the knuckles. They had tightened bolts and gripped handlebars and done plenty of other things over 45 years that he wasn't proud of. They were not gentle hands by nature, but right now, they were trying their best to be. He rubbed the boy's hand for a long time. The room around him kept going. Cards shuffled. Someone laughed low at something across the room. The heater ticked. The storm pushed at the windows. And then the boy's fingers moved. Just a little. A slow curl, like a reflex. Like something half-dreamed. Jack went still. The small fingers tightened. Weak as anything. Barely there at all. But they wrapped around the side of Jack's index finger and held on. Jack stared down at that tiny grip. He didn't move. Didn't breathe for a second. Just looked at that little hand curled around his finger, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like it belonged there. Something happened in Jack's chest then. Not dramatic. Not loud. It was quiet, actually. The way a locked door sounds when the right key finally turns in it. A soft click. Something that had been shut for a very long time. He swallowed hard. His jaw tightened, the way it did when he was fighting something back. He didn't pull his hand away. He just sat there, in the warm glow of the old heater. This big, weathered biker with grease still under his fingernails, holding the hand of a child he didn't know. And he let the boy hold on. Rex Calloway didn't knock. He never did. He pushed through the side door with his shoulders square and his boots heavy on the floor. He was a big man, maybe an inch shorter than Jack, but built like a wall. His gray beard was thick, and his eyes were the color of old iron. He'd been president of the chapter for 11 years. He hadn't gotten there by being soft. He stopped a few feet from the couch and looked at the boy. His expression didn't change. Then he looked at Jack. "Outside," he said. It wasn't a question. Jack set the boy's hand down carefully on the blanket. He stood up slowly, rolled his neck once, and followed Rex toward the back door. The cold hit them the moment Rex pushed it open. The storm had pulled back slightly, but the wind still had teeth. Snow swirled in shallow circles under the single yellow bulb above the door. They stood on the narrow concrete step, and Rex pulled the door shut behind them. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Rex crossed his arms. "How long you planning to keep that kid in there?" "Until he's stable," Jack said. "He looks stable." "He looks warm," Jack said. "That ain't the same thing." Rex exhaled through his nose, a long, slow breath that came out white in the cold air. He looked out at the snow for a second before turning back. "Jack." His voice dropped. Not softer exactly, but more direct. "You know what happens if someone finds out we got an unaccounted-for kid sitting in this clubhouse?" Jack said nothing. "Social services. Police. Reporters, if we're unlucky. Rex ticked them off like items on a list. They start sniffing around here. They don't just come for the kid. They come for everything. You understand that? I understand it. Then you see why this can't go the way you're thinking it's going. Jack looked at him. What way am I thinking it's going? Rex didn't flinch. You tell me. Because from where I'm standing, you've got that look. What look? The one where you've already decided something and you're just waiting for everyone else to catch up. Rex shook his head slowly. I've known you for 20 years, Malone. I know that look. Jack looked down at the snow collecting on the step between their boots. He let the silence sit. He's got frost in his hair, Jack said quietly. He couldn't have been more than a few hours out there. In that. He nodded toward the darkness, where the storm still moved between the buildings. He's 5 years old, Rex. Maybe not even. I know. Somebody left him there. I know that too. So what do you want me to do? Jack's voice was flat, not angry, just flat in the way that meant something was being held down underneath it. You want me to drive him to a hospital and drop him at the door, leave him on a bench somewhere? I want you to call it in, Rex said. Let the system handle it. The system, Jack repeated. Yes. The same system that left him beside a dumpster in a blizzard. Rex pressed his lips together. For a second, something moved behind his eyes. Something that wasn't iron. First light, Rex said finally. That's all I'm asking. We keep him warm tonight, and first light you make the call. Clean, quiet. No trail back to us. He held Jack's gaze for a beat longer. Then he went back inside. The door clicked shut. Jack stood alone on the step. The wind pushed at him from the left. Snow landed on his forearms and melted against his skin. He didn't move for a while. Just stood there, in the cold, staring out at nothing in particular. First light, Rex had said. Jack turned and looked through the small window set into the back door. He could see the orange glow of the heater from where he stood. He could see the edge of the blanket on the couch. He pulled the door open and went back inside. He sat back down beside the boy. He wasn't going to make that call. The clubhouse had gone quiet. One by one, the brothers had drifted off. Some to the back rooms, some to the benches along the wall with their arms folded and their chins down. Diesel was still at the table, but his eyes were closed. Hatch had turned off the overhead light an hour ago, leaving only the orange glow from the space heater and a single lamp in the corner. Jack hadn't moved. He sat on the floor beside the couch with his back against the cushion, and his long legs stretched out in front of him. The boy was still breathing. Slow and steady now. The color had come back to his cheeks, just a little. Pale pink where there had been gray before. Jack watched him. The clubhouse smelled like motor oil, and old coffee, and something close to wood smoke. Familiar smells. Smells that had meant safety to Jack for the better part of 20 years. But tonight, they felt different. Tonight the room felt smaller somehow. Like something big had been brought inside, and there wasn't quite enough space for it. He rubbed the back of his neck and looked at the boy's hand resting on top of the blanket. Such a small hand. The fingers were still slightly swollen at the tips from the cold. There was a faint redness across the knuckles where the skin had gone dry. Jack had seen hands like that before. Hands that had been outside too long with nowhere to go. He thought about Tommy. He hadn't let himself do that in a while. Thinking about Tommy was like pressing on a bruise that never healed. You knew it was there. You learned to work around it. But every now and then, something got past your guard. Tommy had been 23 when he died. Jack had been 32. 10 years older, which had always felt like a whole other lifetime between them. Tommy was the kind of person who laughed too loud at his own jokes and never remembered to fill up the gas tank, and somehow made everyone in the room feel like they were the most important person there. He was also the kind of person who stopped for strangers. That was the thing about Tommy. He couldn't walk past someone who needed help. Didn't matter if he was late. Didn't matter if it was inconvenient. He just stopped. Every time. Jack had used to give him grief about it, called it soft, called it naive. He hadn't called it anything since the night Tommy didn't come home. Jack exhaled slowly and let his head lean back against the couch cushion. He stared up at the ceiling where a water stain had spread into a shape that vaguely looked like a river on a map. He'd looked at that stain 100 times over the years and never really seen it before tonight. The boy shifted on the couch. Just slightly. A small turn of his shoulder. His mouth opened a little, and then closed again. He made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Something small and shapeless. Jack held very still. The boy settled again. Still asleep. Jack let out the breath he'd been holding. He looked at the boy's face for a long moment. The dark lashes against his cheek. The way his brow was still faintly creased even in sleep, like some part of him was still afraid, even when the rest of him was resting. He deserved a name, not just the boy, not the kid. Jack didn't know his real name. There had been nothing in the wet, torn clothes to tell them. No tag, no note, nothing. But he needed something to call him, something that felt real. Jack thought for a moment. He didn't know exactly where it came from. It just arrived the way some things do, quietly and without much explanation. Eli, he said, a whisper, almost nothing. He looked at the boy. Eli, he said again. It felt right, solid, like a small thing with good weight to it. Jack nodded once to himself and looked back at the heater. The boy slept on. Jack watched his chest rise and fall one more time, then pushed himself up off the floor. His knees cracked as he stood. He pressed a hand to the small of his back and stretched quietly, careful not to make too much noise. He crossed to the far end of the room where he had left the boy's things. Someone had placed them near the base of the radiator to dry. A small pile, barely anything at all. Jack crouched down beside it and looked at the pile for a moment before picking anything up. A jacket, or what was left of one. It was thin cotton, dark blue, meant for a much milder season than this one, the kind of jacket a child might wear in early fall. Not in a snowstorm. Not in temperatures that had no business being this cold. The zipper was broken at the bottom, bent sideways so it couldn't close properly. There was a tear along the left sleeve that had been stitched back together with thick black thread. Not neat stitching. Careful stitching. The kind someone does slowly, trying to make something last a little longer than it should. Jack held the jacket in both hands. He set it down gently. Next was a sock, just one, dark gray, worn thin at the heel. He checked the pile again, but there was no match for it. He set it aside. There was a small piece of cardboard that had been folded twice. When Jack unfolded it, he found nothing written on it. Just a blank piece of cardboard that the boy had been carrying for some reason. Maybe it had been a note once. Maybe the ink had run out in the storm. Maybe it had just been something to hold. Jack folded it back the way it had been and set it with the sock. He pulled the jacket toward him again and checked the pockets. The first pocket was empty. The second pocket had a small hole in the lining that opened into the inside of the jacket. Jack reached in through the hole, and his fingers found something at the very bottom, tucked against the seam like it had been placed there deliberately. Hidden. Safe. He worked it free carefully. It was a keychain. Small. Metal. The kind that had seen a lot of years, and a lot of pockets. The chain itself was short and twisted. The metal ring at the top had been bent almost completely flat at some point, and then bent back, so it held on, but just barely. The piece attached to it was a compass, or the shape of one. It was a flat metal disc, roughly the size of a large coin, with the cardinal directions pressed into the face: north, south, east, west. A small needle engraved in the center pointed slightly off true north, frozen there, going nowhere. It was broken. A crack ran from the top edge down through the center of the dial, splitting it almost in half. The two pieces still held together, but only just. Like something that had been dropped once from a great height, and survived it. Barely. Jack's hand stopped moving. He looked at the keychain. He turned it over. The back was smooth, except for a small engraving near the bottom edge. 2 letters, worn almost to nothing by time and touch, but still there if you held it to the light right. He tilted it toward the lamp in the corner. The letters came into focus. TM Jack did not move for a long moment. His chest felt like something heavy had been set down on it without warning. He knew this keychain. He had seen it before, not one like it, not a similar one. This one. He had held it in his own hands at a graveside 10 years ago. He had seen it tucked into a chest pocket. He had watched it disappear into the ground with the only person in his life who had ever made the world feel like a place worth staying in. T.M. Tommy Malone. Jack sat very still on the floor of the quiet clubhouse and stared at the broken compass in his hand. Morning came slow. Gray light pushed through the narrow windows of the clubhouse, thin and weak, the way winter light always looked when the storm hadn't fully let go. The snow had stopped sometime before dawn, but the cold was still sitting heavy on everything outside. Jack could see frost on the inside edge of the window glass when he looked up from the floor. He had not slept. He was still sitting with his back against the wall, the broken compass keychain closed in his fist, when he heard the boy stir. Eli made a small sound. Not a cry. More like a question. A soft, uncertain noise that a child makes when they wake up somewhere unfamiliar, and the memory of where they are comes back in pieces. Jack was on his feet before the sound finished. "Hey," he said quietly. He crouched down beside the cot. "Hey, you're okay." Eli looked up at him with eyes that were still puffy from sleep and cold and whatever the last few days had put him through. He blinked once, then again. His lips pressed together like he was trying to decide something. He did not cry. Jack took that as a good sign. "You hungry?" Jack asked. Eli looked at him for another moment. Then, barely, he nodded. The clubhouse kitchen was not much to look at. A single overhead bulb that flickered if the refrigerator ran its cycle at the same time. A stove that had 1 working burner and 3 that didn't. A shelf of mismatched cans, and a drawer that stuck every time you tried to open it. But it was warm. The small space held heat better than the rest of the building, and that morning it smelled like coffee and something frying. Denny had beaten Jack to it. Denny was one of the older members. Quiet man, big hands, slow voice. The kind of guy who showed up when things needed doing without being asked. He was standing at the stove when Jack came in with Eli, and he didn't say anything. He just looked down at the boy, nodded once like he had already made peace with the situation sometime in the night, and turned back to the pan. He made eggs, scrambled, soft, the way they came out when someone took their time. He put them on a plate with 2 pieces of toast that he had pressed flat against the working burner until they were just barely brown. He poured a small glass of orange juice from a carton in the back of the refrigerator and set it all on the end of the counter at a height the boy could reach. Eli stood at the edge of the kitchen doorway and looked at the plate. "Go ahead," Jack said from behind him. Eli walked to the counter slowly. He pulled himself up onto the stool that Denny had already positioned there without a word. He looked at the eggs. Then he picked up the fork and he ate. Not fast, not desperate. Carefully, like someone who had learned to be grateful for each bite before taking the next one. Jack watched him and felt something press against the back of his throat that he swallowed down hard. Denny refilled his own coffee cup and leaned against the far counter. He looked at Jack over the rim. "He say anything yet?" "No," Jack said. Denny nodded. "Give him time." Jack poured himself a cup of coffee and stood near the doorway. He kept his eyes on Eli. The boy ate everything on the plate. Every last bit of egg. Both pieces of toast. He drank the orange juice in careful sips and set the glass down neatly when he was done. Then he looked up at Jack. Just looked at him. No words. Just those dark, tired eyes finding Jack's face like it was the one thing in the room he had decided to trust. Jack looked back at him. He thought about the phone on the wall, the number he could dial, the people who would come and take over and do things the proper way. He reached past the phone and set his coffee cup on the shelf above it. Not yet. One more day. The argument started before the coffee was cold. Jack heard it from the kitchen doorway, voices rising in the main room, low at first, then sharp. The kind of sharp that cut through walls and settled in your chest, whether you wanted it to or not. He looked at Eli. The boy had gone still on the stool, his small hands flat on the counter. His eyes had moved toward the sound. "Stay here," Jack said quietly. Eli looked at him. "I'll be right back." Jack held up one finger. 1 minute. He stepped into the main room and pulled the kitchen door almost closed behind him. There were 6 of them already gathered. Denny had followed Jack out and stood near the back wall with his arms crossed. Priest was near the pool table, a thick man with a gray beard and a voice like gravel in a tin can. Rooster was pacing near the front door, his boots loud on the concrete floor. Torres stood in the middle of the room, and he was the one talking. "I'm telling you straight," Torres said. He wasn't yelling. Torres never yelled. He just said things in a way that made the air feel smaller. "Every hour that kid is in this building is an hour closer to a squad car in the parking lot." "Nobody's called anything," Denny said from the back. "Not yet," Torres said. He turned his head toward Denny. "You want to bet your freedom on not yet?" Rooster stopped pacing. "Torres is right. We don't even know who the kid is. No name, no family, no story. He could have people looking for him right now." He pointed at the floor. "Right now, and we're sitting here making eggs." "He needed eggs," Denny said flatly. Rooster threw his hands up. Priest hadn't moved from the pool table. He was watching Jack, not the others, just Jack. His thick arms were folded across his chest, and his expression was the kind that was hard to read. Not angry, not calm, somewhere in between. "You sleep?" Priest asked Jack. "No," Jack said. Priest nodded slowly. "Figured." Torres turned to face Jack directly now. "Grizzly, I'm not the enemy here. I'm trying to keep this club out of a situation it cannot afford to be in. You know what happens if they come in here. You know what they find beyond the kid." Jack knew. He didn't say it out loud, but he knew. "So, you're saying give him up," Jack said. "I'm saying the longer you wait, the worse this gets for all of us." "He's 5 years old, Torres." "I know how old he is." "Then you know he can't exactly call someone himself." Jack's voice stayed level. He was working hard to keep it that way. "He was half dead in the snow last night. What was I supposed to do? Keep riding?" "No," Torres said. "You did right bringing him in." "That was right. But right had an expiration on it. That expiration was last night." Rooster nodded. A couple of the others shifted their weight. Denny pushed off the wall. "You're talking about him like he's a problem to be solved." He looked around the room. "He's a child." "He's not our child," Rooster said. The room went quiet after that. Not the kind of quiet that meant agreement. The kind that meant something had been said that couldn't be taken back. Jack looked at Rooster. Rooster looked at the floor. Priest finally unfolded his arms and walked to the center of the room. He stood between Jack and Torres and looked at both of them slowly. "Nobody's calling anyone this morning," Priest said. His voice was quiet, but it landed heavy. "We're not doing anything that can't be undone while we're all still fired up. Everybody stand down." Torres looked like he wanted to say more. He pressed his lips together and looked away. But the damage was already sitting in the room like smoke. Jack could feel it. The men who would back him. The men who wouldn't. The line that had formed overnight without anyone drawing it. The club had split. Quietly and completely. Jack closed the kitchen door behind him. The room was quieter on this side, smaller, warmer. The old space heater in the corner clicked and hummed, pushing out steady heat that made the air feel thick and close. A single bulb hung from the ceiling and cast everything in a soft yellow glow. Eli was still sitting on the stool, exactly where Jack had left him. His small hands were still flat on the counter. His eyes moved to Jack the moment he walked in. Jack pulled out the stool across from him and sat down. His knees were too big for the space. He knocked the counter with his elbow getting settled and muttered something under his breath. He looked up and caught Eli watching him. "I'm not graceful," Jack said simply. Eli said nothing, but he kept watching. Jack reached across the counter and pulled the plate of scrambled eggs closer to Eli. The eggs had gone a little cold by now. He frowned at them. "You eat eggs?" he asked. Eli looked at the plate. "I'm guessing yes," Jack said. "You looked at them like a yes." He pushed the fork a little closer. "Go ahead." Eli picked up the fork slowly. He held it in his fist the way small children do, knuckles up, and took one careful bite. He chewed. He took another. Jack watched him eat without staring. He looked at the counter instead, at his own hands, at the old coffee mug with the cracked handle that had been sitting on this counter for probably 3 years. "I made those myself," Jack said. He nodded at the eggs. "Which is saying something because I'm a terrible cook." He paused. "Denny usually does the cooking. He makes this chili that could restart a stopped heart." He tapped the counter once. "Not that that's a selling point." Eli took another bite. Jack leaned forward on his elbows. "You like motorcycles?" Eli's eyes came up slowly. "I'm going to take that as a maybe," Jack said. "That's fine. Not everybody does." He scratched the side of his jaw. "I've had one since I was 17. First one was a wreck. Bought it for $200 from a guy who should have paid me to take it." He shook his head at the memory. "Spent 4 months fixing it in my uncle's garage. Freezing cold. No heat. Just me and a bunch of parts and a manual I could barely read." Eli had stopped eating. He was listening. Jack didn't make a big deal of it. He kept his voice easy and low, the same way he might talk to a spooked animal. No sudden movements. No big reactions. "First time I got it running, I cried," Jack said. He said it plainly, like it was just a fact. 17 years old, grease on my face, sitting in a cold garage. Cried like I'd just won something big. He looked at the counter. "I guess I had." He stood up and walked to the far end of the counter, where an old shelf ran along the wall. It held a random collection of things. A jar of bolts, a torn road map, a coffee tin, and half buried behind the coffee tin, a small metal toy motorcycle. Old, with chipped black paint, and one tiny handlebar that had been bent slightly out of shape. Jack picked it up. He turned it over in his fingers once, then walked back and set it on the counter in front of Eli. Eli looked down at it. He reached out and touched it carefully with 2 fingers. He rolled it a few inches to the right, then back to the left. Then he picked it up and held it in his palm, and looked at it the way children look at things they are deciding to love. He made a small sound, soft. Just barely a sound at all. And then his face changed. The tension that had lived in his small features since the moment Jack first found him beside that dumpster quietly let go. His cheeks rounded. His eyes went bright. He smiled. It was small. It was real. And it was the most important thing Jack had seen in years. Jack left Eli with Denny. He didn't make a production of it. He just walked over to where Denny was sitting in the big chair by the heater and said, "Keep an eye on him for a few minutes." Denny looked up from his magazine, looked at Eli, and gave a single nod. No questions. Jack walked down the back hallway and into his room. He closed the door behind him. The room was small and plain. A bed with a dark wool blanket pulled tight across it. A dresser with a top drawer that never closed all the way. A shelf with a few books, a spare belt, and an old photograph Jack never talked about. The window above the bed was frosted at the corners, the storm still pressing against the glass even now, quieter than last night, but still there. Jack sat on the edge of the bed. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the keychain. He set it flat in the middle of his palm and looked at it under the weak light of the bedside lamp. It was small, smaller than he remembered it feeling last night when the shock of finding it had made his hands go cold. The shape was a compass rose, the old kind with the 4 directional points spread out like a star. One of the points was broken off. The northeast corner. Just a clean snap, like it had been that way for years, and whoever carried it had stopped noticing. Tommy's had the same break. Jack pressed his thumb over it slowly. He and Tommy had found those keychains at a gas station when Jack was 19, and Tommy was 16. A spinning rack near the register. Tommy had grabbed 2 of them before Jack could say anything, and slapped them on the counter with a crumpled $5 bill. "What are we buying?" Jack had asked. "Compasses," Tommy said, like it was obvious. "They're not real compasses." "They're real enough," Tommy said. He'd handed one to Jack right there at the register. "So we always know which way is home." Jack had laughed. He had taken his and dropped it in his jacket pocket and mostly forgot about it. Tommy carried his every single day. Jack only knew that because every so often he'd catch his brother turning it over in his fingers, the way some people fidget with a coin, quiet and automatic, like a habit he didn't even know he had. Tommy died at 31. A Tuesday. February. The kind of cold that makes the air feel like glass. A highway, outside of Millbrook. Details Jack had long ago stopped letting himself replay in full because the full version was too heavy to carry standing up. After the funeral, Jack had looked for the compass. He'd gone through Tommy's things carefully, one box at a time, in their mother's spare room. He never found it. He'd always figured it had been lost in the accident, gone somewhere in the dark and the cold with everything else that night had taken. He looked at the one in his hand now. It was worn in the same places Tommy's had been worn. The brass dull along the edges. The back scratched in small crosshatch lines the way metal gets when it lives in a pocket for years. It even had a small dent on the left side, low near the base. Jack's jaw tightened. He turned it over again. He was not a man who believed in signs. He had lived too long and seen too much to put faith in things he couldn't explain with his hands. But he sat there in that quiet room with the storm pressing soft against the glass and the sound of voices barely reaching him from down the hall. And he could not shake the feeling that this keychain had not ended up in that little boy's belongings by accident. He didn't know how. He didn't know why. But something deep in his chest, in the part of him that had loved his brother and never quite recovered from losing him, told him that Eli's path and Tommy's were connected in a way Jack didn't yet understand. Denny was the first one. He didn't make a big deal about it. He just showed up beside the couch, where Eli was sitting wrapped in a blanket, and he set something down on the cushion next to the boy without a word. Then he walked back to his chair and picked up his magazine like nothing had happened. It was a small rubber ball, red, the kind you find in a bin near the checkout at a dollar store. Denny had probably grabbed it from the lost and found box near the back door where random junk collected over months. Nobody knew where half that stuff came from. Eli looked at the ball. He didn't pick it up right away. He just looked at it the way he looked at most things, quietly and carefully, like he was trying to figure out whether it was safe. Then, slowly, he picked it up with both hands. He turned it over, squeezed it once. It made a small squishing sound, and he looked up fast, startled. Denny didn't look up from his magazine, but the corner of his mouth moved just slightly. Eli squeezed it again. By mid-morning, the common room had shifted in a way that was hard to name, but easy to feel. Big Roy came in from the garage with grease still on his knuckles, and stopped when he saw Eli sitting on the floor near the heater, rolling the red ball slowly back and forth against the base of the couch. Roy stood there for a second, watching. Then he reached into the deep pocket of his vest and pulled out a granola bar. He walked over and crouched down, which for a man his size was a whole production, knees popping, one hand going to the floor for balance. He held out the granola bar. Eli looked at it, then looked at Roy's face. Roy's face was not a gentle face. It was wide and weathered, with a thick beard shot through with gray, and eyes that had seen too many hard years to look soft. But right now, those eyes were patient. Still. Waiting. Eli took the granola bar. "Good man," Roy said quietly. He pushed himself back to his feet with a grunt and walked toward the kitchen like he had only come inside for a glass of water. Mouse, who was 26 and the youngest member of the club by several years, sat down cross-legged on the floor about 4 feet from Eli after lunch. He didn't say anything. He just sat there. After a minute, he pulled a deck of cards from his shirt pocket and started building a small card tower on the floor in front of him. His tongue poked out the side of his mouth as he concentrated. Eli watched. The tower got 3 levels high before it collapsed. Mouse made a quiet sound of frustration. He looked sideways at Eli. "You want to try?" he asked. Eli was quiet for a moment. Then he moved forward slightly on the floor, closing the distance between them. Mouse handed him 2 cards and showed him without words how to lean them together at the top to make the first arch. Eli's small fingers were careful, focused. The arch held. Mouse gave a low whistle of approval and reached for 2 more cards. By the time the afternoon light went gray against the windows, something had changed in the clubhouse that none of the men would have been able to fully explain to anyone on the outside. The noise level had dropped without anyone asking it to. Boots moved a little quieter on the concrete floor. Voices stayed lower. Someone had turned the old radio down to a murmur. Eli sat in the middle of all of it, small and still wrapped in his blanket, the red ball in his lap, a half-finished card tower in front of him, a granola bar wrapper folded neatly beside his knee. The rough edges of the room had softened around him like ice near a fire. Nobody talked about it, but everybody felt it. Jack brought Eli a bowl of oatmeal that morning. It wasn't fancy. He had found a packet of the instant kind in the back of the clubhouse kitchen, behind a box of crackers, and a jar of peanut butter that had been there so long the oil had separated. He mixed it with hot water and stirred in a little sugar because that was all he had to make it taste like something a child might actually want to eat. He carried the bowl over to the couch where Eli was sitting and held it out. Eli looked at it, then looked at Jack. Jack sat down on the edge of the coffee table across from him, close but not too close. He had learned that about Eli in the past few days. The boy needed space. Not a lot of it. Just enough to feel like he had a choice. "It's warm," Jack said. "Eat what you want." Eli took the bowl with both hands. He ate slowly, carefully, like someone who had learned a long time ago not to trust that the next meal was coming. Jack watched him without staring. He kept his eyes mostly on the floor or the wall, just letting his presence be there without pressing down on the boy with it. When Eli finished about half the bowl, he held it back out toward Jack. Jack took it without comment. He set it on the table beside him and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, hands folded loosely together. The morning light coming through the small window near the ceiling was thin and pale, the kind of light that didn't commit to anything yet. Eli pulled the blanket tighter around his shoulders. Then, after a moment, he slid about 2 inches closer to Jack on the couch. It wasn't much. It wouldn't have meant anything to anyone watching. But Jack felt it like a shift in the whole room. He didn't move, didn't react, just stayed exactly where he was, and let the boy have that small, quiet victory for himself. Later that morning, Jack sat on the floor beside the couch with his back against it and his long legs stretched out in front of him. He had picked up an old car parts catalog from the stack of worn magazines near the door. He flipped through it slowly, not really reading anything, just turning pages. Eli leaned over the edge of the couch cushion to look. Jack tilted the catalog slightly so the boy could see better without having to strain. Eli pointed at a picture of a chrome exhaust pipe. It was shiny and curved, and caught the light on the page in a way that made it look almost like something from a toy store. "That goes on a motorcycle," Jack said. "Like mine." Eli's finger moved to the next page, a set of handlebars. "Those too," Jack said. Eli looked up at him. Jack met his eyes and gave one slow nod. Eli looked back at the page. His finger traced the edge of the handlebar picture carefully, like he was trying to feel the shape of it through the paper. They stayed like that for a while, Eli leaning over the edge of the couch, Jack holding the catalog steady, the radio murmuring low from across the room. Nobody else nearby. It was the most comfortable silence Jack had felt in a very long time. That afternoon, Eli needed something from the far side of the room. A cup of water that Mouse had left on the table near the wall. He climbed off the couch and padded across the floor in his socked feet, and got it, and turned back around. Jack was watching from his chair. Eli walked back toward him. He stopped in front of Jack's chair and looked up at him with the cup held in both hands. "Thank you," he said. His voice was small and a little rough, like he was still remembering how to use it. Jack blinked. "I didn't do anything, bud." Eli just looked at him. Then he climbed up into the chair beside Jack, fitting himself into the small space between Jack's arm and the armrest. "Big Jack," he said simply, like it was a name he had been holding in his mouth for a while and had finally decided to let out. Jack went very still. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He just looked straight ahead at the far wall, jaw tight, eyes steady, but his hand came up slowly and rested gently on top of Eli's small head. And he left it there. Mouse found it first. He had been scrolling through his phone near the kitchen doorway, one boot propped against the wall, a half-eaten granola bar in his other hand. He didn't say anything right away. He just went quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet. Decker noticed. Decker always noticed things like that. "What?" Decker said from across the room. Mouse lowered his phone slowly. He looked over at Jack's chair. Eli was asleep there, curled against the armrest with the blanket tucked up under his chin. Jack was across the room near the workbench, cleaning a carburetor with a rag. Mouse walked over to Decker and held the phone out low, keeping his voice down. Decker read the screen. His expression shifted. He looked up at Mouse. Mouse looked back at him. Neither of them said a word. Jack noticed them talking. He set the carburetor down on the bench and wiped his hands on the rag. Something about the way they were standing, shoulders turned in, voices low, made the back of his neck tighten. He walked over. Mouse hesitated for just a second. Then he handed the phone to Jack without trying to dress it up or soften it. Jack took it. The screen showed a local news page. The headline was simple and plain. "Shelter evacuation leaves multiple families displaced." Several children reported missing amid winter crisis response. Jack read it slowly. The article said that a large emergency shelter about 40 minutes outside of town had been evacuated suddenly 3 weeks ago during a severe winter storm. A burst pipe had flooded 2 of the main rooms. Families had been moved fast, and in the chaos, some had been separated. Most had been reunited within a day or two, but not all of them. The article listed 3 children still unaccounted for. It didn't give names. It said authorities were continuing to investigate and urged anyone with information to contact the County Family Services Office. Jack scrolled down. There was a follow-up paragraph near the bottom. A short one. It said that volunteer search efforts had been organized by family members and local community groups. It said several parents had been going door to door in surrounding towns on their own, refusing to wait on the official process. Jack stared at the screen for a moment longer than he needed to. Then he handed the phone back to Mouse. Nobody said anything. The radio was still going low in the background. Outside, the wind pushed against the side of the building in a long, slow gust. Jack walked back to the workbench. He picked up the rag again. He didn't do anything with it. He just held it in both hands and looked at the carburetor without seeing it. It was Decker who came to him an hour later. He came in from outside, stomping snow off his boots in the doorway. And he looked at Jack with an expression that was carefully flat, in the way that meant he was working to keep it that way. "Ran into Sal from the gas station on Route 9, Decker said. "He said a woman came in there this morning, asking around." Jack set down the wrench in his hand. "Asking what?" "If anybody had seen a little boy," Decker said. 5 years old, dark hair, real quiet." He paused. "She said he'd been at the shelter the night it evacuated. Said she lost him in the crowd when they were moving people out." Jack's chest went tight. "She's been going from town to town for weeks," Decker said. "Sal said she looked worn down to nothing. Showed him a photo on her phone." Decker stopped. He looked Jack directly in the eyes. "Sal said the boy in the photo looked a whole lot like our kid." The room was very quiet. Jack did not move. Across the room, Eli shifted in the chair in his sleep and pulled the blanket a little tighter around himself. Jack did not sleep that night. He sat at the workbench long after the clubhouse went quiet. The overhead light above him buzzed softly. The rest of the building had gone still. He could hear Eli breathing from the back room where he had set up the cot. He picked up the broken compass keychain from the bench. He turned it over in his fingers once. Then he set it back down. He pulled out his phone. There was a man named Reg who lived on the east side of town. Reg was not a biker. He was not club connected in any official way. He was a short, round man in his late 60s who had spent 30 years working for the county before he retired. He knew everybody. He knew how the system moved and where it kept its files and which people answered phones on a Saturday. Jack had done Reg a favor once. A big one. Reg had never forgotten it. Jack sent him a message just before midnight. He kept it short. He said he had heard about the shelter evacuation. He said he had some questions about the missing children listed in the reports. He said he needed to know what Reg could find out quietly, without anything getting official. Reg replied in less than 10 minutes. The message said, "Give me until morning." Jack was outside at 6 in the morning when Reg pulled up in his old blue pickup truck. Reg stepped out slowly, like a man whose knees had opinions. He had a paper coffee cup in one hand and a manila folder tucked under his arm. He looked at Jack without any greeting. He just held the folder out. Jack took it. "I pulled what I could from the public record and made a few calls," Reg said. "Nothing that came from somewhere it shouldn't. Just what's already out there if you know where to look." Jack opened the folder. Inside were 3 printed pages. The first was a copy of the official County Family Services report on the shelter evacuation. The second was a handwritten list of names that Reg had compiled. The third was a page with a single name circled at the top and some notes written beneath it in Reggie's small, careful handwriting. Jack read the circled name, Maria Vega. The notes said she was 28 years old. Single mother. She and her son had been staying at the Millhaven Emergency Family Shelter since late November after losing their apartment. On the night of the evacuation, she had been separated from her son in the rush to move residents out of the flooding section of the building. She had reported him missing within the hour. She had been working with County Family Services, but had also been searching on her own. The note said she had covered 4 towns in 3 weeks. She had been sleeping in her car on some nights to stay closer to the search area. Jack stopped reading. He looked up at the bare sky above the lot. It was pale gray, the kind of gray that came before snow. "The boy," Jack said. "Her boy." "What age?" 5, Reg said. "His name is listed in the case file." "What name?" Reg looked at him steadily. "Elian," he said. "She called him Elian, but the notes say she called him Eli for short." Jack's jaw tightened. Reg watched him carefully. Jack didn't answer. "I don't know what you've got going on," Reg said, "and I'm not asking you to tell me. But that woman has been tearing herself apart for 3 weeks looking for that little boy." He paused. "She's not far. Sal at the Route 9 station told me she was back in the area yesterday. She's still out there right now, somewhere, looking." Jack closed the folder. He stood there for a moment with the folder in both hands. The cold air moved around them without any noise. Eli was alive and warm inside, because Jack had found him. But somewhere nearby, a mother had been searching every single day since the night the world split open around her. That was the truth now. And it was sitting right in his hands. Jack made the decision before noon. He did not talk about it with the club. He did not ask for a vote. He moved quietly, the way a man moves when he knows the clock is already running, and there is no time left to explain himself to anyone. He packed a bag, 2 wool blankets, a box of crackers and some canned soup, a small flashlight, a change of clothes for Eli that one of the brothers had brought from the thrift store a week earlier. He tucked the broken compass keychain into the front pocket of his jacket. Then, he went to the back room where Eli was sitting on the cot, playing with the little carved wooden motorcycle Jack had made for him. Eli looked up when Jack walked in. "We got to take a little trip," Jack said. Eli held the wooden toy against his chest. "Where?" "Somewhere quiet," Jack said. "Just for a little while." He kept his voice flat and easy. He did not want the boy to hear the tension he was carrying. Kids could hear things adults thought they were hiding. Jack had learned that about Eli in the short time they had spent together. Eli studied him for a moment with those dark, steady eyes. Then he slid off the cot and held out his hand. Jack took it. The cabin sat about 6 miles outside of town, up a dirt road that disappeared into a thick wall of pine trees. Jack knew it because the club had used it years ago for storage. It had not been used in a long time. It was not on any map that mattered. He drove his truck rather than the bike. He put Eli in the passenger seat with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders and the wooden motorcycle in his lap. The road into the woods was rough and uneven, and the truck bounced over frozen ruts in the earth. Eli watched the trees through the window. He didn't speak during the drive. The cabin was small. One main room with a wood stove in the corner, a narrow cot against one wall, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs. The windows were cloudy with old dust, and the air inside smelled like cold ash and pine. Jack got to work without stopping. He loaded the wood stove, with splits from the pile stacked outside, and got a fire going. He spread both blankets over the cot. He set the food on the table and put the flashlight near the cot, where Eli could reach it. Within an hour, the room had warmed up enough to take the edge off the cold. The wood stove clicked and popped as the fire caught properly. Eli sat in one of the chairs and watched the orange glow behind the stove's small iron grate. He looked very small in that chair. Jack sat across from him and opened the crackers. He slid the box toward Eli without saying anything. Eli took a few slowly. They sat like that for a while, just the 2 of them and the fire. That night, Eli fell asleep quickly. Jack pulled the blankets up around him and sat back in the chair beside the cot with his arms folded across his chest. He watched the boy sleep until the fire burned low. Then he fed it again. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, Eli made a sound. A short, frightened sound, like something had grabbed him from inside the dream. Then his eyes opened. He looked at the ceiling first, then at the walls. He did not recognize any of it, and his whole body went stiff. He sat up fast and looked around the dark room with wide, panicked eyes. "Hey!" Jack leaned forward. "Hey, I'm right here." Eli's breath came in short, sharp bursts. He grabbed for the blanket. "Look at me," Jack said quietly. "Eli, look at me." Eli turned to him. His eyes were wet. "You're safe," Jack said. "I promise you. We're just hiding for a little while. Nobody's going to get to you here." Eli stared at him, still breathing fast, still scared. Jack didn't move. He just stayed right there, close and steady. Eli's breathing slowed. It took a few minutes, but Jack stayed right where he was, leaning forward in the chair with his elbows on his knees, close enough that the boy could see his face clearly in the low orange glow of the wood stove. He didn't rush it. He didn't try to fill the silence with words. He just stayed. That was something Jack had learned about Eli. Words didn't always help. Sometimes the boy just needed to know someone was still there, still in the room, still watching over him. The panic faded from Eli's eyes slowly, the way a storm clears. His small fists unclenched from the blanket. His shoulders dropped. "You hungry?" Jack asked. Eli shook his head. "Okay." Jack nodded. "That's okay." He reached down beside the chair and picked up the wooden motorcycle from the floor where it had fallen during Eli's sleep. He set it gently on the edge of the cot, within reach. Eli looked at it. Then he picked it up and held it against his chest the way he always did. Jack sat back and looked around the cabin. In the daylight, it had looked rough and bare. Now, in the warm flicker of the fire, it looked a little less harsh. The shadows were soft. The ceiling beams caught the light and glowed faintly. The stove hummed and popped. He had done what he could with the place. During the afternoon, he had wiped down the table and swept the floor with a broom he had found leaning against the outside wall. He had stacked the extra wood inside near the door, so they wouldn't have to go out in the cold for it during the night. He had folded one of the blankets double underneath Eli to soften the cot, and used the second to cover him. It wasn't much. It was nothing close to what a 5-year-old boy deserved. But it was warm, and it was safe. And right now, that had to be enough. He had also pushed the 2 chairs close to the cot, so the space felt smaller, less empty. Less like a forgotten room in the middle of nowhere, and more like somewhere a person was meant to be. He had set the flashlight on the table and left it switched on low, so there was always some light, even when the fire dipped. Eli looked around the room now with tired eyes. The fear was mostly gone. He still looked uncertain. But uncertain was better than terrified. "You want me to stay right here?" Jack asked. Eli nodded. "Then that's where I'll be," Jack said. The boy lay back against the folded blanket and pulled the cover up under his chin. He kept the wooden motorcycle tucked against his side. His eyes stayed open for a little while, watching the light move on the ceiling. Then they closed. His breathing went deep and even. He was asleep. Jack let out a long, slow breath. He leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling himself for a moment. Then he dropped his eyes to the boy. He looked so small, so completely at the mercy of everything and everyone around him. Jack had built the best version of this cabin he could in a single afternoon, with what he had in a duffel bag. He had made it warm. He had made it quiet. He had done what he knew how to do. But the guilt came anyway. It sat in his chest like a stone, heavy and stubborn and impossible to reason with. Because no matter how warm the blanket was, this was still a cabin in the woods. No matter how steady Jack's voice was, this was still a man hiding a child from the world outside. No matter how safe it felt in here tonight, somewhere out there, a mother was still looking. Jack reached into his jacket pocket and closed his fingers around the broken compass keychain. He didn't take it out. He just held it. He sat in the quiet and listened to Eli breathe, and stared at the fire until the flames burned down to a low red glow, and he did not have a single answer for any of it. The first sound came just after midnight. Jack heard it before he understood what it was. A low hum in the distance, steady and moving. Not wind, not an animal. Something mechanical, cutting through the dark and the snow. He was on his feet before his mind had fully caught up with his body. He crossed to the window in 3 steps and pressed himself flat against the wall beside it. He leaned just far enough to look out through the dirty glass. Headlights, 2 beams, sweeping slow through the trees about a 1/4 mile down the road. A vehicle, moving along the old logging trail that ran past the east side of the property. Jack watched it. His jaw tightened. It wasn't moving like someone lost. It wasn't moving fast, the way a local would if they knew the road. It was moving careful and deliberate, the way someone moves when they are looking for something. The headlights swept left, then right. A spotlight. Jack's stomach dropped. He stepped back from the window and turned to the cot. Eli was still asleep, curled on his side with one hand wrapped around the wooden motorcycle. His chest rose and fell slow and steady. Jack stood there for just a second, watching him, thinking fast. He had known this was a possibility. He had told himself he was prepared for it. But standing here now, in the low red glow of a dying fire, with a 5-year-old boy asleep 3 feet away and a spotlight moving through the trees outside, he realized that knowing something might happen and having it actually happen were two very different things. He moved to the table and killed the flashlight. The cabin went dark, except for the faint ember glow from the stove. He crossed back to the window and looked again. The vehicle had stopped. 2 doors opened. 2 shapes climbed out. He couldn't see them clearly, but he could see the way they moved, slow and scanning, flashlights swinging in wide arcs across the snow. They were checking the area. Jack pulled back from the window and pressed his back against the wall. He closed his eyes for a moment and thought it through. The cabin sat back from the trail by maybe 200 yards. The trees were thick between here and there. In the dark and the snow, they might not see the structure right away. But the tire tracks. His truck was parked around back, half covered in snow, but the tracks in were still visible. Fresh enough. If either of those flashlights caught the trail of flattened snow leading back through the brush, they would follow it straight here. He had maybe a few minutes. Maybe less. He moved fast and quiet. He grabbed the duffel bag from the floor and stuffed the extra blanket inside. He took what food was left on the table. He pulled Eli's small bundle of belongings from the corner and pressed them into the bag on top of everything else. Then he crossed to the cot and crouched down beside Eli. He put one large hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "Eli," he said, low and calm. "Hey, buddy, wake up." Eli stirred. His eyes opened slow, cloudy with sleep. "Big Jack?" he whispered. "Yeah," Jack said. "It's me. I need you to get up now, okay? Nice and quiet." Eli blinked. He looked around the dark cabin, and his face shifted, confusion moving toward fear. "Are we okay?" Eli asked. Jack looked at the boy's face, at those wide, trusting eyes, looking up at him in the dark. "We're gonna be okay," Jack said, "but we gotta move." He helped Eli sit up and wrapped the remaining blanket around his shoulders like a cloak. He tucked the wooden motorcycle into the side pocket of the duffel bag, where Eli could see it. Then he shouldered the bag, scooped Eli up against his chest, and looked toward the door. Outside, somewhere through the trees, a flashlight beam swept across the snow. The cabin was no longer safe. Jack pushed the door open and stepped out into the cold. The cold hit them both like a wall. Jack pulled Eli tighter against his chest and ducked his head into the wind. Snow came down hard and sideways, the kind that stings your face and fills your eyes if you aren't careful. He kept close to the tree line, away from the open ground, moving fast, but staying low. Eli didn't make a sound. He just pressed his face into Jack's neck and held on. Jack moved through the trees with his boots, punching through the crusted snow with every step. The duffel bag swung heavy on his shoulder. His breath came out in thick white clouds. The cold was deep and mean, the kind that works its way through leather and denim and doesn't stop until it's settled into your bones. Behind them, back toward the cabin, the light swept again. Jack didn't look back. Looking back cost time, and it cost focus. He just kept moving, threading between the dark trunks of pine trees, keeping his footing on the uneven ground beneath the snow. Eli lifted his head just slightly. "Are those people looking for us?" he whispered. Jack kept his eyes forward. "Don't you worry about that." Are they bad people? Jack thought for just a moment. No, he said. They're not bad people. Eli was quiet after that. He lowered his head back against Jack's shoulder and held on tighter. Like he had decided that was all he needed to know. Jack pushed further into the woods. He had a rough picture of this area in his head. He had driven out here twice before the snow got bad, just to learn the land around the cabin. Old habit. You never stayed anywhere without knowing your way out first. That was something the road had taught him a long time ago. About 1.5 miles north through these trees, there was an old service garage. It had been a repair stop years back when the logging truck still ran this stretch. He had spotted it the second time he drove out, half hidden behind overgrown brush and a collapsed fence. The windows were boarded. The roll-up door was rusted shut on one side, but the side door had been hanging loose on its hinges, and the roof looked solid enough. It wasn't warm. It wasn't comfortable. But it had walls, and it had a roof, and right now that was enough. Jack adjusted Eli's weight on his arm and pushed on. The wind moved through the tops of the trees with a deep, hollow moan. The snow had softened the whole world into something quiet and shapeless. Every tree looked like the last one. Every shadow looked the same. But Jack kept his bearings by the slight downward slope of the ground and the way the wind was coming from his left. North was forward. He stayed on it. His boots punched through the snow, one step and then the next. Eli had gone still against him, still breathing, still awake, but quiet the way a child goes quiet when they have decided to trust completely, when they have nothing left to give but their weight. Jack held him tighter. After a while, the trees began to thin. The ground leveled out, and through the blur of falling snow, a dark shape appeared ahead, low and square, sitting back from a narrow dirt clearing that had been swallowed by weeds and snow. The garage. The siding was weathered gray wood, split in places, dark with old moisture. The roll-up door on the front was rusted and buckled slightly at the bottom corner. A hand-painted sign above it had faded down to almost nothing, just the ghost of letters that no longer meant much. Jack crossed the clearing fast and found the side door exactly where he remembered it. He pulled it open with one hand, the hinges groaning low against the cold. Inside was dark and still. He stepped through and pulled the door shut behind him. The wind stopped. The snow stopped. There was just the dark and the quiet, and the sound of Eli breathing against his shoulder. They had made it. Jack set Eli down on the concrete floor and dug through the duffel bag by feel. His fingers found the small flashlight he had packed before leaving the cabin. He clicked it on. The beam swept across the garage. It was a hollow, forgotten place. An old workbench ran along one wall, thick with grime and scattered rust. A few empty metal shelves stood against the back. An old engine block sat in the corner like a gravestone, draped in cobwebs and dust. The concrete floor was cracked and stained with old oil. The air smelled like cold metal and damp wood, but the roof was whole. The walls kept the wind out. Jack exhaled slowly. He pulled the wool blanket from the bag and spread it on the cleanest stretch of floor he could find near the back wall, away from the draft coming under the roll-up door. He set the flashlight upright on the workbench so the beam bounced off the ceiling and gave them a soft glow. "Come here," he said quietly. Eli walked over slowly. His footsteps were small and careful on the cracked floor. He sat down on the blanket without being asked and pulled his knees up to his chest. Jack sat beside him and pulled one side of the blanket around the boy's shoulders. For a while, neither of them spoke. The wind pressed against the boards outside. It found the gaps and made a thin, whistling sound that moved through the garage like something alive. The flashlight beam trembled slightly every time a strong gust hit the wall. Eli stared at the floor. "Big Jack," he said. "Yeah." "Are we going to keep moving?" Jack looked at him. The boy's face was pale and drawn. His eyes were too serious for a 5-year-old. Too careful. Like he had learned a long time ago that the world could pull itself out from under you without any warning, and he was always waiting for it to happen again. "Not tonight," Jack said. Eli nodded slowly, but his shoulders didn't relax. He stayed curled in on himself, small and tight. A few minutes passed. Then Eli spoke again, and his voice was smaller this time, quieter, like the words were hard to get out. "Are you going to leave me here?" Jack turned to look at him fully. "What?" "When you go." Eli's jaw was tight. His eyes were shiny in the low light. "Are you going to leave me here by myself?" "I'm not going anywhere," Jack said. "You said that at the cabin, too." Eli's voice cracked just slightly at the edge. "And then the lights came and we had to run, and it was scary." Jack didn't have an answer for that, because the boy wasn't wrong. Every place they had been so far had fallen apart. The clubhouse, the cabin, now this. Every time Jack had told him it was safe, something had come along and proved him wrong. A tear slipped down Eli's cheek. He wiped it fast with the back of his hand like he was embarrassed by it. "I don't want to be alone again," he whispered. "I was alone before, by the cold can. It was really dark and really cold, and nobody came for a long time." The cold can. That was how Eli said it. The dumpster. Jack felt something shift hard inside his chest. He reached over and put his hand gently on top of the boy's head. Eli went very still. "I came," Jack said quietly. "I came that night." "But what if next time you don't?" Jack didn't answer. He couldn't. Because sitting there in that dark, cold garage, with the wind scratching at the walls and a 5-year-old boy looking up at him with a face full of fear, the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. He had been telling himself he was protecting Eli, but running from lights in the snow, hiding in broken buildings, watching a child cry in the dark. This wasn't protection. This was something else entirely, and Jack knew it. He couldn't keep doing this alone. Maria had been walking for 2 hours. Her boots were soaked through. The cold had moved past her skin a long time ago and settled deep into her bones. Her fingers inside her gloves had gone from painful to numb. She barely noticed anymore. She just kept walking. The town had given her nothing. The shelter had given her a description of the direction Eli had last been seen. A volunteer had mentioned the industrial side of town. An old man at a gas station had said he thought he saw a big motorcycle heading out past the freight yard a few nights back. A woman at the corner store said she had heard something about a child at the old Hell's Angel clubhouse on the edge of town. Every lead was small. Every lead was uncertain. Every lead made her feel like she was chasing smoke, but she followed every single one, because stopping was not something her body knew how to do anymore. Not since the night the shelter alarm went off and the crowd surged, and she had reached back for Eli's hand and found nothing there. Nothing. Just cold air where her son had been. She still felt it sometimes. That exact moment. Her fingers closing on empty space. The sound of her own voice screaming his name above the noise of the crowd. She pressed on through the dark. The freight yard was behind her now. She had gone past the chain-link fence, past the rows of silent warehouses, past a closed salvage lot with a rusted gate. The road here was barely a road. It was cracked blacktop that had heaved and broken apart from too many winters and not enough care. Snow filled the gaps. The streetlights were far apart, and 2 of them were burned out. She stopped. Ahead of her, set back from the road behind a gravel lot, was an old garage. The kind of place that had probably fixed trucks years ago, and then just stopped one day and stayed empty. The roll-up door was down and rusted at the edges. The sign above it was too faded to read. A few empty oil drums were stacked beside the side wall. She almost kept walking. But then she noticed the light. It was barely anything, just the faintest pale glow leaking out under the edge of the roll-up door, like a flashlight pointing up at the ceiling from the inside. Maria stopped breathing. She stood completely still in the middle of the broken road and stared at that thin line of light. Her heart started pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She crossed the gravel lot carefully, stepping around a patch of ice near the center. She reached the side of the building and pressed her back against it. Her breath came out in fast, visible clouds. She moved along the wall until she reached a small side door. Wood. Old. The kind that had a little gap between the frame and the edge. She put her eye to the gap. At first, she could only see shadows and the soft bounce of flashlight glow. A workbench, metal shelves, cracked concrete. Then, she saw him. He was sitting on a blanket near the back wall. Knees pulled up to his chest. A blanket draped around his little shoulders. His hair was the same. The way he sat was the same. The way he held himself small, like he was trying to take up as little space in the world as possible. She had seen that 1,000 times. Her hand flew to her mouth. She made a sound she couldn't control. It came from somewhere deep and broken inside her, and it was barely louder than a breath, but it was everything she had. Eli. Her legs nearly gave out. She caught herself against the doorframe with one hand. Her whole body was shaking. Her vision blurred with tears so fast she could barely see. But she had seen enough. She had seen him. He was alive. He was right there. Maria pushed the side door open. It creaked, loud. The sound cut through the silence inside the garage like a crack of ice. The big man near the wall spun around instantly. His body went rigid. His hand shot out in front of the boy on instinct, a wall of flesh and leather between Eli and the door. Maria froze in the doorway. The man was enormous. Broad shoulders, heavy beard, a worn leather vest over a thick jacket. His eyes were hard and sharp, and locked directly on her. He looked like someone who had spent a lifetime being ready for whatever came through the door. But Maria was not afraid. She could not feel anything except the boy behind him. "Eli," she said. Her voice broke on the single word. It came out cracked and thin, and full of every sleepless night she had survived since the shelter. The big man did not move right away. He studied her face. Something shifted in his expression. His jaw tightened. His eyes moved quickly between her and the boy behind him. Then from behind his arm came a small voice. "Mama!" The word was tiny, uncertain, like Eli was not sure he was allowed to believe what he was hearing. Jack stepped to the side. That was all it took. Eli saw her. He was on his feet before anyone could speak again. The blanket fell off his shoulders and pooled on the concrete floor, and he ran. He ran with everything his little legs had, arms out, head down, like he was running against the wind, and nothing in the world was going to stop him. Maria dropped to her knees right there on the cold garage floor. He hit her so hard she nearly fell backward. Her arms wrapped around him, and she pulled him in tight. So tight. Both arms locked around his small back, her face buried in his hair. She felt him shaking. She felt him crying before she even heard it. Little shoulders heaving, his hands gripping the back of her coat like he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. She was crying too. She did not try to stop it. She had been holding it together for weeks, holding herself upright through pure will and the desperate belief that he was out there somewhere. And now he was here. He was in her arms. She could feel his warmth and his weight and the realness of him, and everything she had been holding back came pouring out of her at once. "I've got you," she whispered against his hair. "I've got you. I've got you. I've got you." She said it over and over because she needed to hear it as much as he did. Eli pulled back just enough to look at her face. His eyes were red and wet, and his bottom lip was trembling. He reached up with one small hand and touched her cheek like he was checking that she was real too. "I thought you were gone," he whispered. "I'm here." She caught his hand and held it against her face. "I never stopped looking for you. Not for one single second." He buried his face in her neck and held on. Maria closed her eyes. For a long moment, there was nothing else in the world. Jack stood near the back wall of the garage and watched. He did not move. He did not speak. His arms were at his sides and his hands were open, and he stood there like a man who had just set something down that he had been carrying for a very long time. Something heavy, something that had, without him ever planning for it, become the most important thing he had ever held. He watched the boy cling to his mother. He watched her rock him slowly on the cold floor, both of them crying, both of them real and whole and found. And Jack felt it happen quietly inside his chest. The space where Eli had been was already starting to ache. He looked away. He pressed the back of his hand briefly against his mouth and stared at the far wall. He had known this moment was coming. He had told himself he was ready. He had not been ready. Maria was the first to speak again. She pulled back slightly from Eli, just enough to look at him properly. She ran her hands over his face, his arms, his small hands, checking, making sure. Her eyes moved over him the way only a mother's eyes can, looking for anything wrong, anything missed. Eli looked tired. He looked thin. But he was warm. His cheeks had color. His eyes were clear. She exhaled a long, shaking breath. Then her gaze moved to the big man standing near the wall. Jack had not moved. He was still standing back, arms at his sides, giving them space. His face was hard to read. Not cold exactly. More like a man trying very hard to keep himself together by not showing anything at all. Maria studied him. She had imagined this moment 100 different ways during her search. She had imagined being angry. She had imagined screaming at whoever had her son. She had built up walls and rehearsed hard words and told herself she would be fierce and unmovable when the moment finally came. But looking at this man now, she could not find the anger. She saw the dark circles under his eyes, the wear in his face, the way he stood slightly angled toward Eli even now, even while stepping back, like some part of him could not fully stop being a shield. She opened her mouth to speak. Then she saw it. It was hanging from the zipper of his jacket. Small, worn smooth from years of handling. A keychain shaped like a compass, the needle broken off, the casing scratched and dull with age. Maria went still. Her eyes locked on it and did not move. The color drained slowly from her face. "Where did you get that?" she said. Her voice came out low, barely above a whisper. Jack looked down at the keychain, then back at her. His expression shifted, guarded, but curious. "Found it with the boy," he said. "In his things. Night I picked him up." Maria rose slowly from the floor. Eli stayed close, both arms wrapped around her leg, his face pressed against her side. She took one step toward Jack, then another. She reached out. Jack unclipped the keychain from his zipper without a word and placed it in her open hand. She stared at it. Her fingers closed around it carefully, the way you hold something that might break, or something that might break you. "I gave this away years ago," she said quietly. "At a shelter, during a bad winter. Eli was just a baby." Jack did not speak. He watched her. "There was a man," Maria continued. Her voice was steady but thin, like she was pulling the words up from somewhere deep. "Big guy, quiet. He wasn't supposed to be there, I don't think. Not a resident. But the storm had shut everything down and the shelter was packed, and people were scared." She looked up at Jack. "He saw me struggling with Eli. I didn't have enough blankets. I didn't have formula. I was sitting on a cot in the corner trying not to cry in front of my baby." She paused. "He didn't say much. He just started helping. Found blankets from somewhere. Tracked down a volunteer with formula. Sat nearby all night so I wouldn't feel so alone." Her eyes dropped back to the keychain in her palm. "When he left in the morning, I wanted to give him something. I didn't have anything. So I gave him this. It was the only thing I had that meant anything." She swallowed. "He told me his name was Tommy." The word landed in the garage like a stone dropped into still water. Jack did not move. He did not breathe for a moment. His eyes went to the keychain in her hand and stayed there. His jaw tightened slowly. His throat worked. "Tommy," he said. Just the name. Just once. Quiet as a prayer. Maria looked at his face. "Did you know him?" she asked. Jack's mouth opened, then closed. He pressed his lips together hard. His eyes went red at the edges. He looked away, toward the far wall, toward nothing. "He was my brother," Jack said. The words came out rough, scraped clean of everything soft. Just the truth, bare and bleeding. Maria's hand went to her mouth. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The garage was quiet, except for the wind pushing against the walls and Eli's small, steady breathing against Maria's side. Then came the sound of tires on gravel. Red and blue light swept through the high windows of the garage, painting the walls in flashing color. The crunch of boots on frozen ground followed. A fist hit the metal door hard, 3 sharp knocks that echoed through the whole space. "Police! Open up!" Jack straightened. His eyes moved to Eli first, then to Maria. He nodded once, slowly, like a man accepting something. He walked to the door and pulled it open. 2 officers stood in the cold, flashlights up, breath clouding in the night air. A third hung back near the patrol car, radio in hand. "Step outside, sir," the first officer said. Jack stepped out. "Hands where we can see them." He raised his hands without argument. No resistance, no posturing. Just a big, tired man standing in the snow, doing what he was told. Maria moved. She came through the door with Eli on her hip, one arm wrapped around him tight. She stepped forward until she was standing right beside Jack, and she turned to face the officers. "He didn't hurt my son," she said. Her voice was clear and firm. "He saved him." The officer with the flashlight looked between her and Jack. "Ma'am, we received reports of a child being held without consent in this area, and we need to—" "I understand what you received," Maria said. "But I'm his mother. I'm standing right here, and I'm telling you this man found my son freezing to death in an alley and kept him alive." Her voice did not waver. "He protected him when no one else did. I am not pressing charges. Not against him. Not for anything." Eli looked at the officers from his place against Maria's shoulder. Then he looked at Jack. "Big Jack," Eli said simply. Jack's hands were still raised. He glanced sideways at the boy. Something moved across his face, something quiet and enormous. The officers exchanged a look. The one with the radio stepped closer and spoke in a low voice to his partner. There was a long moment of muffled conversation. Forms would need to be filed, statements taken, child services would follow up. But no one put cuffs on Jack. Maria stayed beside him the entire time. Months passed. Winter loosened its grip slowly, the way it always does. The ice along the streets turned to gray slush, and then to nothing. The trees came back. The days stretched out longer and warmer, and the town began to look like a different place entirely. On a Saturday afternoon in early December, almost a full year after that terrible night, snow fell again. Soft and quiet this time. No storm behind it. Just snow, drifting down easy, the kind that settles on your shoulders without you noticing. Jack pulled up in front of a small house on a quiet street. He cut the engine and sat for a moment, helmet in his hands, looking at the front door. It opened before he could even get off the bike. Eli came running down the front steps in a puffy red coat and boots that were slightly too big for him, his arms out wide, his face lit up like something electric. "Big Jack! Big Jack!" Jack crouched down and caught him, lifted him straight up off the ground. Eli laughed, that full, bright laugh that still got Jack right in the chest every single time he heard it. Maria appeared in the doorway. She leaned against the frame with her arms crossed loosely, smiling. "He's been watching the window for an hour," she called out. "I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day."